Everyone, Madison here with Health by Ratio, and in this video, we are going to talk about how often the root causes of injuries that we're dealing with in our knees, our hips, lower back, sciatica, even all the way up to the neck, start from the ground up. Health by Ratio is an online team of licensed physical therapists, orthopedic movement specialists, and functional health coaches that work together to help our clients truly rehabilitate from recurring and chronic pains and injuries and bridge the gap back to the active lives they love to live. All right, so going into our main topic about the importance of addressing imbalances that may be occurring from our feet and ankles and how that impacts the rest of our bodies, I want to use myself as an example here. I could pick from countless of our clients that have dealt with everything from major knee injuries to hip operations, lower back chronic issues, thoracic outlet syndrome, shoulder tears, neck, and all of it having some sort of impacts coming from the ground up. But for me personally, this hits close to home because I myself grew up, first and foremost, kind of getting into a variety of different activities and sports, one of which was skateboarding. And based off of how I was moving my body at a young age, I developed some really bad mechanics of specifically my right ankle. I got into the habit of constantly externally rotating my ankle because I was doing tricks. I was always like rotating my foot to the side. And I sprained that ankle way too many times to count. And then when I started playing football and actually competing in a sport on a regular basis, I had even more injuries to that ankle because of the imbalances that I had. Well, over the years, over the decades, that started to translate to imbalances that trickled their way up to my hips. And that put torque on my body where I would do things like a squat, or if I got set up to jump, for instance, or land from a jump, well, my foot would turn out. And as I would get loaded into that jump, my right knee was tracking inside of my big toe. So I put all this torque on my knees. That also often caused the way my glutes versus adductors and quads were firing to get off kilter, and I would lean into that side of my body as I went down. So I put all this aggressive tension into my right hip. So I was often like, if I really tried to squat properly and squat deeply, I was often shifting my hips off to the side as I went down. Well, over time, that built into some recurring chronic back pain, spasms that I had, SI joint misalignments, and lovely sciatica on the right-hand side. And then all as we continued up that kinetic chain, I had a neck injury in football, but it lingered for years after, where I had all these problems when I rotated over my right shoulder, where I'd get what you call a stinger, basically a nerve would get pinched, and it would zing down my back and fire up down my neck and shoulder. And that was something that I dealt with for years, and it wouldn't heal because my whole body was basically kinked out of alignment. Now, it wasn't so noticeable that you'd see me walking around like this all the time, but it was subtle enough that it was subtle, yet it was enough that every time I sat down, I stood up, or I kneeled down to grab something, or if I was exercising in any way, shape, or form, whether I bent over to pick things up, any kind of little movement, even my walking gait, where I had one foot always turning out while the other foot was pointed straight ahead. I had an asymmetrical hip drop when I would take a step to that side because my glute wasn't firing very well on that right-hand hip. Well, all of those things were death by a thousand cuts. And even though I had major injuries at some point or another that kind of created a major trauma to a joint or a tissue, they lingered and stayed irritated, never fully healed because of the imbalances that I cultivated, these deviations. And really, it came from, again, the ground up. Well, everybody moves a little bit differently. Everyone has their own set of asymmetries. Some people are obviously more symmetrical than others, and we don't necessarily need to be perfectly symmetrical to live a healthy and abundant life. But we do need to get pretty close. We can do a lot of work, whether we've dealt with surgeries in the past or whether we've dealt with serious injuries in the past. We might not be able to get to perfect, but we can do a lot of work to improve and take steps in the right direction. So The common things that I see in a lot of the people that I connect with on the free video assessments that we do and the clients that we end up working with is that we often tend to lack dorsiflexion. We tend to lack the range of motion of pulling our toes, flexing our ankles up towards the shins. We do a whole lot of plantar flexion. We drive the feet down into the ground. We are running, we're walking, we're jumping, all that kind of stuff. And we also tend to wear shoes that have higher heels than toes. Even most just like regular sneakers have a slight heel lift. So we're constantly flexed downward at the ankle instead of neutral at a 90 degree. So we start lacking that dorsiflexion. Well, that causes us to compensate in a variety of ways. The most common is we'll tend to turn out our feet. Whether it's when we're squatting, we'll turn the feet out, or whether it's when we're walking or running, we'll turn the feet out. So, and now this doesn't happen with everybody, but this was very prevalent for me, and it is fairly consistent. It also often results in us over pronating at the ankle. The ankle is supposed to be able to pronate and supinate for that matter. We're supposed to go in both directions. But when we walk, we don't want our ankle constantly buckling inward. That results in a lot of torque on the toes for them to get compressed, things like bunions and toe injuries to occur. It also flattens out the arches in our feet, overstretches them. Even if we have high arches, it basically causes them to stretch out each time we're stepping through. So things like plantar fasciitis shows up, or heel spurs occur. Also torque to our Achilles and our calf. And then, like I said, it can trickle up the chain and have issues with our actual knees, hips, back, and all the way up to our neck and shoulders. So how do we resolve this? Well, I did I did it in a couple of broad, or I use very specific techniques, but there's a broad formula that we can kind of translate to really anybody. And so when I'm working with somebody, whether on, again, just our free video assessments that we do, or with our clients, we kind of lay out this groundwork for them and coach them through what they need to do at what stage to get themselves back to full ranges of stable motion. And so, for instance, stage one is often we got to restore the range of motion. We actually have to regain the ability to move in our full range of motion. So, how do we do that? Well, mobility techniques. Does that mean we stretch a bunch? Do I just go and get into a bunch of calf stretches and try to work into that dorsiflexion and some Achilles stretches? No, that's not really going to do me much good. It helps a little bit. It might help us open up a little bit. But if we have serious gunk that's developed over time, aka the fascia lines, the deep connective tissues that run from the skin to the bone, that are like a vast web that runs everywhere in the body, if these guys are stuck together, they're really dense. We can pull on them as much as they want. They don't really open up. That's why so many people who are like, I've been stretching for 10, 20 minutes, 30 minutes every morning for the last 5 years. I'm still just as tight as I was before I started. Yeah, well, it's because we need to take out the heavy jackhammer tools because that fascial gunk is so tough. We got to take out some mobility work, and we got to break up this tissue. We got to give it a reason to bust up, and break down that concrete, and then we can actually stretch this thing out once we get the tissue more pliable. So that's where things like a foam roller, a trigger point ball set, or a massage gun, those kinds of things, even our own hands, getting a massage, those kinds of activities or techniques, I should say, are going to be key. So the areas that I needed to focus on a ton, and this happened, I needed to work on both ankles. I shouldn't say my left ankle was perfect, but my right ankle was my true problem child. The areas that I needed to work on was one, the bottoms of my feet. I needed to roll out the bottoms of my feet like crazy. I knew this anyway. I started developing plantar fasciitis. So I needed to massage out that plantar fascia line. Also, I needed to work on the backside of my ankle, up the Achilles, the soleus, and this big calf muscle. And because I tend to turn my foot out to the side, still to this day, I have to be conscious of it. I've largely ingrained it out of my system and trained my central nervous system to move differently. But when I get tired, when I get lazy, I revert back to that old habit. So I need to often work the lateral edge of my calf. That's where I get a lot of the most tension. I find for a lot of our clients that lack dorsiflexion, this is the main hot spot that they got to work too. Well, that was really key. The other one is again, this is nitty gritty for me because I was overpronating a lot. I needed to work into my perineal region. So I needed to get into kind of this along the inside of my Achilles up that kind of lateral edge of the outside of my ankle here. That was a really important area for me to mobilize because it was chronically tight from me always going in this direction with my foot. It tenses up that area. So I needed to mobilize all those areas. Then I was able to do some good stretching. That's stage one. I got my range of motion back. Now I need to train myself how to move it in stable ways. Otherwise, like one of our coaches, Coach Heather Bailey, who's an amazing body of knowledge, one of her quotes that I love is she says, with more mobility comes more instability, meaning we can do all the mobility we want. I can get as many deep tissue massages that I want, and I can do as much foam rolling and trigger point as I want, but that doesn't teach me how to stabilize my body. I didn't learn how to move any differently. So now I just get up off of that foam roller and I start moving around. I'm going to move the exact same way I did before, just with deeper ranges of motion. So I'm going to go even further into my compensations. And it can often, if I don't pair this up with the right stability work, doing just a bunch of stretching, a bunch of foam rolling can often result in more problems because now I'm deviating even more so away from the way that I want to move. So how did I correct that? Well, this is where we can do things like proprioceptive exercises, where it actually teaches our body how to move differently. For instance, a huge one that I'm a fan of for those of us that tend to overpronate is we can use something like a resistance band connected at around ankle height. And it's now pulling me in the direction of pronation. So it's pulling me in the direction that I want to collapse in. Obviously, I would be focusing probably more on my right ankle than my left, how I'm demonstrating right now, but that's where my post is and that's where I have the band connected. So envision this is my problem ankle. Anyway, once I have it there, now I can do a variety of functional activities and exercises. So meaning I can do things like squats. I can do things like lunges. I can do things like hip hinges as if I was picking something up. I can go in and out of these exercises while I am constantly fighting this band trying to pull me in. I'm not going to let it pull my ankle in. I'm not going to let it collapse my arch. And the more I practice it, the stronger that my ankle gets, which also coincides with how my glute medius fires. But the stronger my ankle and hip get to keep myself in a stable position to not let this band pull me inward, then that translates to how I walk, how I run, how I sit down and stand up and squat down to pick things up. And I can rebuild the stability back to my ankles, which then builds my foundation from the ground up where I can now have the active glute and core complexes that I need to then keep my back healthy, to keep obviously my hips healthy, to keep my neck in a stable position. My neck and shoulders sit on top of my core. So if this thing is all dysfunctional and getting pulled off to the side, guess what? My neck is going to be all dysfunctional and getting pulled off to the side too, because it has an unstable basis of support. So now that I've balanced myself up from the ground up, I can actually keep my core engaged in a symmetrical way, keep myself balanced, and keep my head over my shoulders in the ways that keeps it happy. And so this works, it helps me correct everything from head to toe. Now, I also had some other things going on over the years, even though my educated guess is that my imbalances came from the ankle up. Now, there were other things happening with my left hip. There were other things happening with the way my obliques were firing asymmetrically and the weakness from one side versus the other. I had certain rotator cuff imbalances with my right shoulder versus my left. So I had a cascade of imbalances that were going up my body that I also needed to address. But the root cause and where I needed to start was working from the ground up. And as I fixed my ankles, I was able to better fix my hip, which then I was able to better fix my shoulder. And then all these injuries that I was dealing with for, at the time, 8 straight years were able to actually heal. And I was able to get my body moving back to full range of stable motion. So if you guys have any questions, if you like this video, then please follow us, comment on the the below. Let us know how you liked it, what your questions are, all that good stuff. And if you'd like some actual free one-on-one coaching to understand where your potential imbalances are coming from, what's going on with your right versus left ankle, right versus left hip, right versus left shoulder girdle and thoracic spine, and to understand how that might be impacting how your body moves, we'd love to help for free. We do 2 free coaching calls. The first call is to get to know you, to understand what your body's been through, to understand what your goals are. It's relatively quick. But the second call is where you and I connect over video and we go through a number of full body assessments to see how and why your body is moving the way it does. And more importantly, teach you how to fix it back to full range of stable motion, give you a game plan on what specific mobility area, what tissues you need to mobilize versus what type of exercise you need to do, like I needed to do to get your body moving the way that you want for your fitness and health goals. So if you're interested in that, click below the video or look below the video. You'll see a link to our calendar where you can pick a day and time that works best for you for your first call. And outside of that, hope you guys enjoyed.